All right, so the Audio-Technica ATH-M50X. This is a headphone that many know and love and has been around for a long time. And in this video, we're going to find out whether or not it's worth it to buy it in 2022. This is Andrew with Headphones.com, and today, yes, we're going to take a look at the M50X. And this is an over-ear closed-back dynamic driver moving coil headphone that comes in right at around $170. And this unit was actually a demo unit that we did have to pay for. But with that out of the way, let's get into the review here, guys. And I'm going to begin by talking about the build quality, design, and comfort first, as usual. And for that, the M50X, at least for the build quality, it's pretty solid. And I actually think that for its mechanical design here, all the different moving pieces and the ability to sort of like fold it and lay it flat, on the table there, with full cup swivel, which is really nice, along with a generally sturdy feeling build. You get good extension here on the arms. In my mind, that is one of the key reasons to be buying this headphone or to be considering this headphone. It's the kind of thing where if you were to throw it into a backpack, you could feel fairly confident that it wouldn't break. Now, I'm also going to show you here what else you get with it, and we'll talk about the cables here. And I say cables because you get a number of them. You get one coiled cable here, makes it easy to use, it's a good length, and you also get two additional cables. This one here is a longer straight style cable here as opposed to the coiled one here, and then you also get a shorter one. Now, these are terminated in 3.5, but they do also give you a 1/4 inch adapter right here. So you can just swap that on. Now, the interesting thing about the connector is that this is a single entry connector on the side of the cup, but there's sort of like a locking mechanism here where you line the two pieces up, right? So you can slide it in like that and then twist it, and then it's locked in, and it shouldn't just pull out if you're just going to pull on the cable like that. So that's a pretty solid system, and I got no issues with that. Now, when I put it on, you do actually have left and right indicators on the side here. Always a nice thing. And here's how it looks on my large melon head. I think some people think of these also as like kind of fashion headphones, or you see them out in public a lot. And I think for two reasons. One is they look extra normal, and they don't look like they're drawing too much attention. They look reasonably professional, and so it speaks to me. I like that kind of style for headphones. The second reason is that these do a particularly good job of sound isolation. And that is also in part because they have a fairly significant clamp. Now, of course, clamp pressure is going to be, at least in part, determined by how large your head is. And for me, again, I'm a typical audiophile with, thick boy head. The clamp is a little bit intense. So that does take away from the comfort a little bit, but I think that's sort of a trade-off that you're going to have to decide for yourself because, as I said, the isolation here is really solid. Even just listening to myself speaking, it's difficult to make out the sound of that over, the voices in my head that normally tell me to do terrible things. But nonetheless, I can see why people use these, portably all the time. They look good. They're decent for their comfort, but they're not the most comfortable as a result of the slightly higher clamp pressure that you do also get. Now, one last thing is that the pads also are removable. Let me just do that now so you can see. And you can see you could also replace the pads, and I know there's a lot of folks doing that. One thing I want to caution you, though, is that when you're replacing the pads will change the frequency response. So make sure that whatever you're replacing the pads with, that the manufacturer of those pads has published frequency response graphs for how they change these headphones when you put them on. Okay, so now let's talk about the most important part, the sound quality. Of course, this is meant to be a more portable headphone. It's easy to drive and it doesn't take a lot of power, so you should be fine. Certainly not a headphone that requires a discrete or standalone desktop amplifier. But how does it sound? Well, I'm going to begin by talking about the objective stuff as usual. So we're going to talk about the frequency response and tonal balance of this headphone. And I'm going to throw the graphs up on the screen here for you guys as usual. And I'm going to start with the smoothed version of the frequency response here so you can see what I'm calling here sound signature. And that's to get a general sense of the tilt of the headphone. You can see basically the relationship between bass, mids, and treble this way. And it is more of an apples to apples comparison with the Target here because as I mention every time, there's much more to frequency response than just target adherence. But as you can see with the sound signature here, this is a very bass boosted headphone. It's very strong and prominent and kind of in the region that you don't want it to be so pronounced in. So it does kind of take over the rest of the mix a little bit. It's in the mid bass and the upper bass. I mean, yes, it's boosted in the sub bass as well, but it's much more strongly pronounced in the mid bass and in the upper bass. Again, let me say this as clearly as possible. For those who want lots of bass, that's fine, but this is not the ideal way to do that, all right? This isn't going to give you good bass. This is going to give you just too much bleed between the bass and the mids. So, even though it kind of dips down at around 400 hertz, ideally you'd want that whole region shifted kind of downwards a little bit to make the bass a little bit more distinct. But for the rest of the tuning there, as far as the sound signature is concerned, it actually looks pretty solid. It's got the right balance there between mids and treble. With that said, as we move into the more fine-grained analysis of this headphone's frequency response, I'm going to show you a couple of issues that are definitely audible and they cause some problems for me. And you can see here the first one is in sort of the highest point of the ear gain there, or it's near it, right at around 4K. There's a bit of a peak that kind of causes it's not really like shout because it's more of a narrow peak, but it does cause just a little bit of that glare in that region. And so it borders on shout for me a little bit there. And the other thing I noticed just when listening to music before doing the analysis of the frequency response and before measuring here, when I was just listening to music, I noticed that there was some kind of like unevenness in the treble. I thought to myself, maybe there's a little bit of sibilance there and it would be a very simple fix, but actually it's a series of fine-grained peaks that show up in the frequency response here as well. And I actually even noticed this when I was doing my sine wave sweeps. And it's interesting because it's not like the headphone lacks the right amount of presence for the treble, or it's not like it's boosted in the treble too much. It's at kind of the right spot. It's more that it's just a little bit uneven. So when you hear the S's, F's, and T's, the consonant sounds for vocalists, it sometimes just lacks the precision. It doesn't sound like the S's, F's, and T's are as clearly coming through as they would in real life. It's almost as if they're a little bit on the fuzzy side. So that, I think, that coupled with the dominating bass presence of this headphone are what kind of throw this off for me. But as said, I was actually pleasantly surprised with the overall balance of this headphone being pretty good. Like, the ear gain, like the upper mids, it's all kind of where you would expect or where you'd hope it would be. So you do get all the clarity coming through there from, the upper mids. So, the general balance, apart from the bass, the general balance for the more difficult areas is reasonably intact. It's only the fine-grained stuff that I think it just is not that great. But at the same time, at around $170, that's not something we could complain all that much about. Although maybe we could. And the reason I say that is because the AKG K371 does a much better job in both the bass and in the treble. But first, let's talk about the subjective stuff here. How does this sound as far as the technical performance and all of that? And yeah, I mean, it's nothing special here. This is about what you would expect. Things tend to mush together a little bit. And as I mentioned, that treble response, it tends to be a little bit on the fuzzy side. So as much as the presence is still there, it is still crisp, and it sounds like there's enough sparkle there. It's still just a little bit on the hazy and fuzzy side of things, where your individual instrument lines aren't that well articulated, and there's not really much going on for layering and separation and sort of structure for the individual instrument lines and images that come across. The fuck was that? As far as the soundstage goes, again, nothing special here, but could we really expect all that much? I don't really think so. But of course, the question that we're here to answer is whether or not you should buy the M50X in 2022. So the M50X is actually decent for its tonal balance, but it is not as good sounding as the AKG K371 right here. The main reason to get the M50X over the K371 is that the build on the M50X is much, much better. It is a much more sturdy feeling and well-designed, well-engineered, for its mechanical design at least, headphone, in spite of the fact that it just does not hold a candle as far as sound quality is concerned to the K371. The K371 is a more well-balanced tuning across the board. It's less dominating in the mid bass and upper bass, and the bass boost is more focused towards the sub bass on the K371, which in my view is the way to do bass because it makes your bass stand out more. It is more distinct that way. And it also doesn't bleed into the mids. It doesn't dominate over the rest of the headphone's frequency response, and it allows the rest of the clarity and presence for the music to shine through a little bit better, well, quite a bit better on the K371. Additionally, the K371 doesn't have those issues in the treble that I mentioned with the M50X. It is a little bit forward there at around 8K, sort of in the mid treble, but the rest of the more fine-grained balance is actually a little bit better on the K371. It doesn't have those series of peaks there at around 9K. Instead, it has the proper concha dip that you would expect on the measurement fixture that most good headphones will typically have. And for me, I can't think of a reason why I would use the M50X over the K371 for pro applications when I'm in an indoor environment, like at my desk there, or in a studio environment or something like that. However, there are all kinds of people who are looking for headphones to use for things like field recording. Like if you're outside and you're looking for a pair of headphones for monitoring during field recording, this is going to last you quite a bit longer, I expect, than the K371. And as much as I love this headphone, and I think everybody should have this headphone on hand because it is an important kind of sound quality that everybody needs to know exists at this price. This is just cheap, rickety feeling plastic. This is something that I would not really feel all that confident about throwing into a backpack, whereas the M50X, it does give me that confidence. So in conclusion, do I recommend the Audio-Technica ATH-M50X in 2022? Well, certainly not for sound quality because the K371 exists. This is a simply better sounding headphone. Like I see these headphones, these M50Xs everywhere, and again, I have no issue with it. I think it makes perfect sense to use these headphones if you are throwing them into a backpack, if you're using them portably, if you are doing that kind of thing where a more rugged and sturdy design is a requirement. Sure, that makes sense, but I don't think that we should think of the M50X as the default entry point into high-end headphones or good sounding headphones. In my view, that is the K371, and I think everybody should be at least give this a try, at least try listening to this. As long as you're okay with the more rickety build. Sean Olive, if you're watching, get AKG to make this with the kind of build quality that you get with this. And then everybody will be happy. But anyways, that does it for this video. Thanks for taking the time to watch it, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.